It was a warm summer evening in our stately Boston home on Commonwealth Avenue, an evening that was meant to encapsulate the very essence of a picture-perfect life, a life built on routine, on love, on the steady rhythm of family togetherness. I, Daniel Carter, a respected financial consultant with a reputation for calm precision and unwavering dedication to both my work and my family, found myself immersed in the familiar comforts of home. The savory aroma of home-cooked food filled the air as my wife, Rebecca, moved gracefully in the kitchen, her gentle smile conveying warmth as she plated dinner with a meticulous care that had once always reassured me of our happiness. Our 8-year-old son, Ethan, with his boundless energy and innocent delight, scampered into the dining room, his cheerful laughter adding a melodic counterpoint to the evening's ambience. In that moment, as I sat at the head of our dining table surrounded by the people I had always believed made up the core of our perfect life, I felt an overwhelming sense of contentment, a sense that this was the very picture of the family and future we had so lovingly built over the years. Yet as the dinner hour approached, a subtle disquiet began to stir within me. There was something in Rebecca's behavior that was not quite right. Unlike her usual self, she moved with an almost deliberate carefulness, her actions measured and her eyes, for once, fixed not on her phone nor distracted by trivial tasks, but solely on the work at hand. Even the way she prepared my favorite dish, New England clam chowder, a comfort food that had always evoked memories of simpler, joyful times, carried an undercurrent of something unfamiliar and cold. As I savored the first spoonful, expecting the familiar warmth and reassurance that the dish had always provided, a sudden chill crept up my spine, a sensation that was both inexplicable and deeply unsettling, as if the very air around me had turned brittle with foreboding. I looked across the table at Rebecca, watching her carefully, noticing that instead of joining us at the table as she normally would, she lingered at the edge of the kitchen, her expression unusually guarded and her movements deliberate in a way I had never seen before. Every detail, the absence of her habitual phone checking, the stillness in her eyes, the measured pace of her actions, spoke a silent warning that something was amiss. In that moment, as the family gathered for what should have been a celebration of our love and the life we shared, a spark of dread ignited in my heart, and I found myself forced into a choice: to ignore this subtle dissonance in favor of the comfort of routine, or to let the unease guide me toward uncovering what lay hidden beneath the surface. I chose to trust my instincts. Even as I smiled outwardly and exchanged loving glances with Ethan, a part of me began to compile the small details: a shift in Rebecca's tone, the way she hesitated before speaking to a passing guest, the slight falter in her step when she thought I wasn't watching. My mind, ever interactive, prompted me silently: observe, record, but do not confront. Gather the evidence first. With that internal command, I resolved to watch and listen carefully, to allow the evening's quiet moments to reveal the truth that I sensed was lurking behind the veneer of our picture-perfect life. I reached for my phone not to call her, but to activate a discreet note-taking app where I could jot down my observations. Each oddity, each deviation from the routine I had come to cherish. I documented that the very dish I adored, prepared with such care, now seemed to serve as an omen rather than comfort, as though it carried with it the chill of impending betrayal. The voices of our guests, the cheerful banter, all mingled with a rising undercurrent of tension that I felt deep in my bones. I recalled the countless times in the past when small, seemingly insignificant details had hinted at something more, but I had chosen to brush them aside in favor of trusting the woman I loved. Tonight, however, the accumulated weight of those signs could no longer be ignored. As the evening wore on and the conversation at the table continued in a superficially pleasant tone, I maintained my outward composure, my smile never faltering, even as my mind raced with questions and doubts. I observed how Rebecca occasionally paused mid-conversation, as if distracted by a thought too secret to share, and how she glanced over her shoulder with a fleeting expression of guilt before masking it with a practiced smile. Every subtle gesture, every moment of silence that fell between her words, became a piece of a larger, darker puzzle. In that moment of introspection, as I looked around at the family that I thought I knew so well, the sparkling eyes of Ethan, the approving nods of our guests, and the confident poise of Rebecca, now tinged with a mystery I could no longer ignore. I felt a bitter irony settle in my heart. The very life I had built, the picture-perfect routine that had defined my days, was now on the brink of shattering, all because of a lie that had been whispered quietly in the midst of a summer evening. And so, with each passing minute, as the ambient sounds of celebration mingled with the silent, haunting whispers of suspicion, I vowed silently that I would not let this lie define my future. I resolved to gather every piece of evidence, every scrap of truth that could unravel the facade of the woman I thought I knew, and to prepare for the inevitable confrontation that would force the truth into the open. In that quiet, oppressive moment, as the perfection of our anniversary party began to reveal its dark underbelly, I made an interactive choice. A decision to observe, document, and wait, knowing that the betrayal that had crept in so subtly tonight would soon explode into a reality that would change everything. And with that final, steely thought in my mind, I set my phone aside, took one last sip of my drink, and prepared myself for the long, arduous journey ahead. A journey that would force me to confront not only the lie that had changed everything, but also the painful truth of a life built on deception. I forced my breathing to slow as I lay there in the dim light of our living room, the soft hum of the air conditioner blending with the distant murmur of evening traffic outside, while my little boy Ethan lay motionless beside me, his small hand still clutched tightly in mine as if seeking comfort and reassurance that was no longer there. In that suffocating silence, a cold, creeping dread began to take hold, and I realized with a sudden, horrifying clarity that the life I had so painstakingly built with Rebecca was crumbling around me, piece by piece, and that nothing would ever be the same again. I remembered the way she had acted throughout the day, her unusual attentiveness in the kitchen, her deliberate, almost mechanical precision as she prepared my favorite dish, the New England clam chowder, a meal that had once symbolized comfort and home, but now seemed to herald something far more sinister. It was as if every movement, every careful gesture, was calculated not to nourish our family, but to set in motion a plan that I had only just begun to understand. I recalled that moment vividly. As Ethan's delighted giggles had echoed through the house while he slurped his soup, my eyes had met Rebecca's across the table, and I saw her standing there, not with the warm, loving look I had come to expect, but with an expression so disturbingly serene and detached that it sent a shiver racing down my spine. I could almost hear an interactive prompt within my own mind, a voice urging me to choose between panic and cautious observation, between calling out in anger and waiting to see what unfolded. Yet I did nothing at that instant but stare at Ethan, whose innocent features belied the danger lurking in the air. Then, without any preamble, I heard footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate, the sound of Rebecca's heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she emerged from another room. I felt a surge of panic, mixed with a grim determination, as I clutched Ethan's hand and whispered softly, "Don't move yet," my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. As the door clicked shut behind her, sealing her departure from the room, I forced my eyes open, trying to pierce the veil of confusion and fear that clouded my vision. And in that final, shattering moment, as the dim light revealed every line of betrayal etched on the walls of my mind, I knew without a doubt, my wife wanted us dead. The realization hit me like a freight train, and it wasn't merely the shock of her words or the subtle cues that had been building over weeks. It was an undeniable, gut-wrenching truth that shattered every illusion I had ever held about our life together. In that moment, as the silence stretched on and my mind raced with interactive choices, should I call for help immediately, or should I gather more evidence before acting? I knew that any impulsive move might cost us everything, yet every second wasted increased the risk that I would lose my son, that the carefully laid trap she had set in motion would claim us both. My mind, once clouded by years of unquestioning love, now whirled with the cold precision of betrayal. Every late-night phone call, every unexplained expense, every secretive glance that I had once brushed aside as the quirks of a busy life now converged into a damning mosaic of deception. I felt a painful surge of regret for the times I had ignored the subtle hints, for the silent warnings from friends, and even for my own misjudgment, but amid that regret burned a fierce determination, a resolve to survive this nightmare and to reclaim the future that was being callously stolen from me. I pressed my hand against my chest as if to hold together the shattered pieces of trust, and I listened as the sound of my own breath filled the void left by Rebecca's departure. In that moment, the interactive choice in my mind was stark and irrevocable. I had to act, and I had to act decisively, even if it meant diving headfirst into a maelstrom of horror and uncertainty. With Ethan's small hand still in mine, I weighed my options silently. Should I try to rouse him and call for help, or should I remain hidden, gathering my thoughts and planning my next move with the meticulous care that had become my only refuge in the face of such betrayal? I decided, with a heavy heart and trembling resolve, that my priority had to be to protect Ethan at all costs. If I could secure his safety, then I could later confront the monstrous truth of what had been orchestrated by the woman I once loved. My pulse thundered in my ears as I gently roused him, whispering words of comfort that belied the storm inside me, even as I vowed to myself that I would never let this betrayal destroy the life I had built, nor would I allow Samantha's dark plan to claim us both. In that fraught, frozen moment, as I cradled my son close and forced myself to breathe steadily despite the overwhelming surge of horror and resolve, I realized that the path forward was now irrevocably altered. The promise of our picture-perfect life was nothing but a fragile illusion shattered by the truth of her intentions. I knew that every step from now on would be a delicate balance between survival and retribution, between protecting the innocence of a child and exacting a calculated, vengeful justice that would ensure Samantha's treachery would never go unpunished. And as I sat there, with Ethan still clutched in my arms and the door closed behind me like a final, unforgiving verdict, I made an unspoken pledge. I would gather every last shred of evidence, every memory and every secret that could expose the monstrous plan she had set in motion, and I would turn this unimaginable betrayal into the fuel for a comeback that would redefine my destiny. In that moment, with the weight of a shattered future pressing down upon me, I understood with a gut-wrenching clarity that my life would never be the same again, and that the moment I knew, when I finally realized that my wife wanted us dead, was also the moment I resolved to fight back with every ounce of strength I possessed. The world around me had turned into a surreal nightmare as I lay in the dim light of our living room, still reeling from the revelation that my wife, Samantha, had orchestrated a plan so dark it defied everything I had ever believed about our life. With Ethan lying motionless beside me, his small hand still clutched in mine like a lifeline, I forced my breathing to slow, each labored inhale and exhale a desperate attempt to regain control in a situation spiraling out of control. I knew we had only minutes, maybe even seconds, to act before the full extent of her plan unfolded. My eyes flickered across the room in a frantic search for anything that might serve as a means of escape. My phone, normally a lifeline, lay abandoned on the countertop, its distance too great to risk in a moment like this. Then, as if fate had provided a lifeline in the chaos, my gaze landed on Samantha's laptop, open and humming softly on the dining table as though it were an unguarded portal into her secret world. With my heart pounding like a drum in the silence, I reached out and grabbed the device, my hands trembling as I flipped it open, hoping to find something, anything, that would confirm what I had already feared. There, on the screen, was a series of recent messages, a text conversation with a contact simply marked S. My blood ran cold as I read the chilling words, "Is it done?" followed by Samantha's reply, "Yes. They won't wake up. The house will be cleared by morning." My mind raced, every fiber of my being screaming that this was not merely an escape plan, but a meticulously orchestrated murder plot designed to wipe us from existence. In that moment, I felt the interactive choice in my mind surge like a siren. Should I immediately confront Samantha, shout her name into the void and demand that she reverse her plan? Or should I silently secure the evidence, record every detail of her treachery for the moment when I could mount a counterattack? I swallowed hard, the weight of the decision nearly paralyzing me, and chose the path of silent, desperate caution. I clenched my jaw and fought against the rising tide of panic as I carefully read every word of the conversation, ensuring that I captured every piece of evidence in my memory and on that laptop screen. I knew that if I could secure this data, It would later serve as the cornerstone of my vengeance, a damning testament to the betrayal that had been so meticulously planned by the woman I once loved. My heart hammered in my chest as I realized that Samantha had arranged everything. The clear message that our time was running out, the confirmation that by morning, our home would be empty and lifeless, and the cold, calculated assurance that she would be free. In the midst of this horror, I looked at Ethan, whose small, fragile form lay still beside me, and I forced myself to focus on his well-being. I knew that every moment wasted could cost him his life, so I gathered my courage and, with trembling hands, switched off the laptop and closed it gently, knowing that I had just uncovered the final confirmation of her sinister plan. I then slowly rose, every movement a battle between grief and determination, and knelt beside Ethan to check his pulse, which, though weak, beat steadily enough to give me hope. As I cradled him in my arms, I surveyed the room one last time. My mind raced with interactive prompts. Should I try to rouse him and call for help immediately, or should I remain still and gather my thoughts, risking precious time in the process? I chose the latter, whispering softly to Ethan, "Don't move yet," even as my own inner voice screamed that I had to act immediately to save him. The silence of the room was now broken only by the sound of my shallow breaths and the distant hum of traffic outside, and I knew that every second was critical. I felt the chill of betrayal seep into my very soul as I realized that Samantha had planned everything meticulously, down to the very minute of our impending demise, while I had been kept in the dark by a lifetime of trust and love. Yet, in that moment of utter despair, I also felt a spark of resolve igniting within me. The interactive choice before me was no longer one of passive victimhood, but of active survival and calculated retribution. I carefully moved toward the back door, my every movement deliberate as I prepared to lead Ethan to safety. I glanced once more at the laptop, my mind recording every detail, the text messages, the timestamp on the conversation, the cold certainty in Samantha's words, before tucking it away in a secure envelope that I would later use as irrefutable evidence. My heart pounded as I grasped Ethan's small hand, feeling the fragile pulse of his life, and I made a silent vow that no matter how treacherous this night became, I would do everything in my power to protect him. With my senses heightened and every nerve on edge, I crept toward the door, every step echoing in the quiet of our home like a countdown to the moment of escape. I knew that the world outside was uncertain and dangerous, but it was a world I had to confront if I was to have any chance of survival. As I reached the threshold, I paused for a split second to steel myself, my mind a battlefield of interactive choices, weighing the risks of immediate flight against the possibility of alerting Samantha to our escape. I chose silence and stealth. I would slip away into the night without a trace, leaving behind the monstrous betrayal and the cold, calculating heart of a woman who intended us dead. I pushed the door open slowly, listening to the soft creak that marked our departure from the house that had been both our sanctuary and our prison. In that heart-stopping moment, with Ethan still clutched tightly in my arms, I stepped out into the cool night air, every step a desperate bid for survival, every breath a promise that I would fight against the betrayal that had shattered our lives. And as I ran through the quiet streets, guided only by the flickering light of distant street lamps and the rhythmic pounding of my heart, I knew that this desperate gamble, to escape and gather my strength for the coming battle, was the only way to ensure that Samantha's murderous plan would never claim us, and that I would eventually transform this betrayal into the foundation of my ultimate retribution. I had barely caught my breath in the safety of my car when the shock of what I had discovered on Samantha's laptop was compounded by the arrival of my twin brother, James, whose familiar face emerged in the glow of the headlights as he pulled up beside me. The relief of seeing him was quickly replaced by an overwhelming dread as I recounted the horror of the messages I had just read. Messages that confirmed not only that Samantha had planned our murder, but also that her scheme involved a contact whose name I had come to dread. Between gasps and halting words, I managed to tell James, "Rebecca, she tried to kill us." His face went pale as he absorbed the gravity of my confession, his eyes widening in disbelief and sorrow. "You were right," he murmured after a long pause, his voice heavy with regret. "She's been planning this for a long time." And there's something else. My heart sank as I watched his expression darken further. I showed him the text messages from Samantha's conversation with a contact labeled S, and his eyes locked onto a detail that chilled him to the core. "I know this number," James said in a hushed, trembling tone. "It belongs to Sarah Collins." I frowned, confused by his words, and asked, "What?" James turned to me, his gaze steady and filled with an intensity that belied the shock on his face, and explained, "Sarah Collins was my ex, the one who ruined my life 3 years ago. And now it appears she's involved in this plan too." The revelation struck me like a sledgehammer. Sarah Collins, a name that had once brought only painful memories for James, a woman whose betrayal had left deep scars, was now entangled in Samantha's murderous conspiracy. In that instant, the full scope of the betrayal became unbearable. It wasn't just Samantha's plan to escape and leave us to die. It was a collusion between her and Sarah, a twisted alliance formed to strip me of everything I had built. The room in my mind filled with interactive choices. Should I confront James immediately about the implications of Sarah's involvement, or should I remain silent and let the shock cement itself as further evidence of the monstrous betrayal that had been orchestrated against us? James's eyes, dark and resolute, left no room for hesitation. He insisted that we had to act immediately. "We have to end this," he said firmly, clenching his fists as if trying to physically ward off the horror of it all. I nodded in silent agreement, knowing that this revelation was the final piece in the puzzle, a puzzle that depicted a sprawling web of deceit and betrayal that stretched far beyond our once happy home. As we sat in the dim glow of my car's interior, the city lights flashing past in a blur, I realized that our journey had taken a horrifying turn. The man I once believed I was, loyal, loving, and blind to the hidden truths, was now forced to confront the full weight of betrayal, not just from the woman I had trusted with my life, but from the conspiracies that had ensnared even my own brother. The interactive decision was clear. We had to expose the truth, not only to reclaim our lives, but to ensure that the twisted alliance that had once shattered everything would be brought to justice. In that moment of grim revelation, as James and I exchanged determined glances and silently vowed that we would dismantle this dark network piece by piece, I felt a surge of resolve so powerful it numbed the pain of betrayal and transformed it into a weapon. With Sarah Collins's name now linked irrevocably to Samantha's plot, the stakes had risen exponentially, and I understood that the road ahead would demand every ounce of strength and cunning I possessed. And so, with the evidence from that damning conversation echoing in my ears and the grim reality of our situation settling in, I prepared for the next phase of this harrowing journey, a phase that would see me confronting not only the treachery of the woman I once loved, but the monstrous collaboration of those who had conspired to betray me. My heart was heavy, yet the resolve in my veins burned brighter than ever, and as the headlights of James's car merged with the darkness of the night, I knew that nothing would stop me from reclaiming my life, no matter how deep the betrayal ran. The shock of learning that Sarah Collins, my twin brother James's ex, the very woman who had once left him shattered, was implicated in Samantha's plan added a staggering new dimension to the horror that had already overtaken me. The revelation that she, once a peripheral figure in our lives, was now deeply entwined in this labyrinth of deceit turned every betrayal into a crushing blow. It was as if every whispered suspicion, every half-forgotten memory of her secretive behavior, suddenly coalesced into an undeniable truth. Samantha had not only planned her own escape with her lover, but had colluded with someone who had a proven track record of betrayal. The very thought of Sarah's involvement made my stomach churn and my mind race with questions. Why had she aligned herself with Samantha, and what did she stand to gain from this murderous alliance? As James and I discussed the gravity of the situation in hushed, trembling tones within the confines of my safe house, I felt the weight of every interactive decision pressing on me. Should I confront Sarah directly and risk igniting an even broader scandal, or should I use this information to further fortify my case against Samantha, ensuring that every layer of her treachery would be exposed in a single, devastating blow? The answer, as it slowly crystallized in the depths of my wounded heart, was that I would do both. First, by recording every detail of our conversation, every emotional nuance that testified to the betrayal, and then by quietly contacting my legal team to ensure that the name Sarah Collins would be permanently linked to Samantha's criminal plot. As I listened to James recount his own painful memories of Sarah, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the way she had once manipulated him with a smile that promised forever, I felt my anger rise in a measured tide, a controlled fury that demanded justice but would not allow me to fall into impulsive recklessness. I recalled the interactive prompt in my mind: expose the full network of betrayal or limit the case to Samantha's crimes? In that moment, I knew that limiting the scope would only serve to diminish the true magnitude of the deceit, so I resolved to document everything. I began by meticulously reviewing every message on my phone that linked Samantha to Sarah, a series of texts that spoke of secret meetings, hidden transactions, and whispered promises of a future that would leave me destitute and alone. Every detail was recorded, every timestamp noted with the precision of a man who had spent sleepless nights compiling a dossier of treachery. The evidence was irrefutable. Not only had Samantha emptied our joint account, but she had done so in collusion with Sarah, orchestrating a plan that spanned months and involved financial manipulation on a scale I had never imagined. As I recorded these findings, my mind was filled with interactive choices, each one a reminder that every step I took from now on would determine the future of my life. I could almost hear the choice: press 1 to confront Sarah directly and demand answers, or press 2 to let the evidence accumulate and let the law do its work. I chose the latter, knowing that in the cold light of legal scrutiny, every secret would be exposed and every betrayal accounted for. In that moment, as I looked at the faces of James and Ethan, both caught in this terrible web of deception, I felt a renewed determination, a resolve that transcended the personal pain and transformed it into the driving force behind my quest for justice. I resolved that I would not allow Samantha's alliance with Sarah to go unpunished, that I would ensure that every individual involved in this intricate scheme would be held accountable for their actions. With my digital evidence carefully compiled, every message, every transaction logged in a secure folder on my encrypted server, I began drafting a detailed report that would form the backbone of my legal case. The report was a chronicle of betrayal, a damning narrative that would leave no doubt as to the depths of deception that had been reached. In that moment of painful clarity, I understood that the bigger betrayal was not merely the act of stealing our savings or the cold admission that Samantha intended to kill us. It was the collusion between people I once trusted, the betrayal of family ties and shared memories that had once been sacred. As the night wore on, and as I finally locked away the dossier in a secure digital vault, I felt a grim satisfaction. The evidence was complete, and the interactive choice was clear. I would now move forward, unflinching and resolute, to expose this network of betrayal and ensure that the full force of justice would be brought down upon Samantha and Sarah. My heart ached for the loss of trust and the shattered dreams, but it also burned with a quiet determination, a resolve to reclaim my life piece by piece and to ensure that those who had orchestrated this monstrous betrayal would never again hold power over my destiny. And as I sat there in the dim glow of the safe house, with the silent testimony of every piece of evidence around me, I made a solemn vow. The bigger betrayal would be avenged, and no amount of deceit could ever undo the truth that I had worked so hard to uncover. The realization that Samantha's treachery was part of a larger, calculated conspiracy prompted a series of swift, decisive actions. With the damning evidence now complete and the network of betrayal, including the involvement of Sarah Collins, uncovered before me, I knew that it was time to set the trap that would finally end this nightmare. My twin brother James, whose own painful experiences with betrayal had fueled a shared determination to see justice done, immediately took the lead in making the necessary calls. In a state of quiet urgency, he contacted the detectives he trusted, and within minutes, 2 seasoned investigators arrived at our safe house. Their presence, clinical and assured, brought a small measure of relief, but the air was thick with anticipation and the knowledge that nothing could stop what was coming. I watched as they meticulously scanned the premises, their eyes sharp and focused on every detail, from the scattered documents to the secure digital devices that I had prepared. With a steady, deliberate hand, I picked up my phone and sent a carefully crafted message to Samantha, a message that would serve as both bait and confirmation of her imminent downfall. I typed, "I woke up. Where are you?" and pressed send, my pulse pounding as I waited for her response. Almost immediately, her reply flashed on the screen. "It doesn't matter. I'm leaving. Don't try to find me." The cold indifference in her words was the final twist in the labyrinth of betrayal, a signal that she believed she could vanish into the night, unchallenged and free from the consequences of her actions. But Detective Howard, one of the investigators, had already intercepted the message on our secure line. With a knowing smirk, he announced quietly, "We already did," as if to say that no matter how far she tried to run, the net of justice was already closing in around her. In that moment, the room seemed to contract, the tension almost palpable as every interactive choice in my mind coalesced into one singular, irrevocable decision. The trap was set, and there would be no escape from the consequences of her betrayal. James and I exchanged determined glances as we began coordinating the next steps. He pulled out his phone and made a call that would seal Samantha's fate, instructing our trusted private investigator to track her whereabouts, to monitor every digital footprint she left behind. The plan was simple yet effective. Once Samantha attempted to leave the country or access any of the funds that she had so callously drained from our joint accounts, the detectives would be ready to intercept her. Every detail of the trap had been orchestrated with the precision of a chess master. My legal team had already been briefed on every nuance of the case. Every piece of evidence that linked her to the network of financial fraud was securely archived, and now the final move was at hand. I recalled the interactive prompts in my mind, urging me to choose between making a public spectacle of her downfall or letting the trap work in silence, its impact amplified by the careful, calculated withdrawal of every resource she had depended on. I opted for silence. The beauty of the trap was its quiet inevitability. The less noise it made, the more devastating its impact would be when the truth finally emerged, uncontested and irreversible. As the clock ticked closer to the critical hour, I felt the weight of every decision I had made. From the initial revelation at the anniversary party to the painstaking assembly of evidence, and it all converged into this one defining moment. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I realized that this trap was not merely an act of personal revenge. It was a definitive move in reclaiming my life, my assets, and my future from the clutches of deceit. The room was filled with a silent, collective anticipation as I prepared to watch Samantha's world collapse. Every second that passed amplified the gravity of the interactive choices I had made. Choices that ensured that, come morning, Samantha's escape would be nothing more than a failed attempt to outrun the inevitable. And so, as the detectives finalized their preparations and my legal team readied the final documents that would expose every ounce of her fraud, I sent one last message to Samantha, a final, chilling reminder that the trap was set. Enjoy your getaway, but know that there's no running from the truth. With that, the stage was set, and every piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, ready to expose the full measure of her betrayal and to bring her to justice in a manner so silent, so precise, that even the echoes of her deceit would be forever silenced. Every detail, every calculated move, would soon converge into the final act of retribution, a final, irreversible blow that would leave Samantha with nothing but the bitter taste of her own downfall. At 10:15 p.m., the final act of this twisted drama unfolded with an intensity that left no room for escape. Samantha stepped into the hotel lobby, suitcase in hand, her carefully curated facade crumbling under the weight of inevitable consequences. In the crowded lobby, where opulent decor and the murmurs of unsuspecting guests provided a backdrop of normalcy, she never saw us coming. My twin brother James, whose quiet loyalty and unyielding resolve had been my anchor throughout this harrowing ordeal, stepped forward first, his voice dripping with a mixture of disdain and a twisted sort of affection as he greeted her with a casual, "Hey, sweetheart." Running away? In that moment, Samantha froze, her confident demeanor shattered in the face of our unexpected intervention. Then, with the calm assurance of a man who had long prepared for this confrontation, I strode up to her, holding my phone aloft as if it were a scepter of truth, and pressed the play button on a recorded message that would seal her fate. Her voice, captured on that device, filled the room with its chilling finality. Yes, they won't wake up. The house will be cleared by morning. The sound of her own words, spoken in a tone that was disturbingly devoid of remorse, drained the color from her face, leaving her looking pale and terrified. Behind us, Detective Howard emerged with handcuffs glinting under the lobby's lights, his calm declaration cutting through the tension. "Rebecca Thompson, you're under arrest for attempted murder." For the first time, Samantha's eyes reflected genuine fear, the mask of arrogance replaced by the stark terror of a woman who now realized that the consequences of her betrayal were inescapable. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of finality, a catharsis that was as bitter as it was sweet. The interactive choices that had guided every step of my painstaking plan had converged into this one inevitable outcome. Samantha, the woman I had once trusted implicitly, had not only betrayed me but had orchestrated a murderous plot that would now be exposed to the world. As the detective secured her and began reading her rights, I watched impassively, my emotions locked away behind the cool veneer of a man who had reclaimed his destiny. James, standing by my side, gave me a brief, understanding nod, an unspoken acknowledgement that we had both suffered deeply, yet now, at long last, justice was being served. In that moment of ultimate betrayal, as the stark reality of the evidence mingled with the chaos of public arrest, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The weight of Samantha's lies and treachery had finally been lifted, replaced by the unyielding promise that my life, my future, was mine to reclaim. There was no triumph in cruelty, no glee in retribution. There was only the cold, hard truth that those who deceive and betray will eventually face the consequences. And as I turned away from the scene, my heart steady and my mind clear, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was truly free, not just from the bonds of a love that had been nothing more than a carefully constructed lie, but from the suffocating weight of a betrayal that had threatened to destroy everything I had ever held dear. That night, as I walked away from the hotel with James by my side and Ethan's future now unburdened by the darkness of Samantha's treachery, I knew that the ultimate betrayal had been avenged, and that I, at long last, had emerged victorious from the ruins of our shattered life. Epilogue. A new beginning 6 months later, as I sat on the porch of our modest new home, a haven built on the promise of real family and the strength to overcome deception. I looked into Ethan's curious eyes and asked, "Are you still scared of Mom?" With a small, innocent smile, he replied, "No, Dad, because we have real family." James joined us, handing me a steaming cup of coffee, and as I sipped it, I reflected on the journey that had led me here. The sun set over the Boston skyline in a final, brilliant display of hope and closure, reminding me that even the darkest betrayals eventually give way to a new beginning. We had survived the onslaught of lies and betrayal, and in our collective triumph, we had redefined what it meant to be a family, one not bound by blood alone, but by the unyielding strength of trust, resilience, and the courage to reclaim one's destiny. As I gazed out at the horizon, a quiet smile played on my lips, a smile that spoke of hard-won freedom and the knowledge that true revenge is not in tearing others down, but in rising above the pain to build a future where betrayal holds no power. And so, with every new sunrise promising endless possibility, I vowed that the legacy of Samantha's deceit would be nothing more than a cautionary tale, while my own life would stand as a testament to the fact that sometimes, the best revenge is simply moving on and thriving in the face of insurmountable odds.